Welcome to the Rabia and Sana show. We're two Desi girls reinventing cultural norms with love to make difficult conversations easier to help you take courageous steps faster.
Whether you feel like a misfit now or have been breaking the standards, this podcast is for you, for the adults, the young. Come as you be and become your authentic self as you desire. Let's go reinvent some cultural norms together.
Hello everyone, I am Rabia Paracha. I have been a rebel without a cause for most of my life until I discovered my purpose to empower women to empower themselves. And that led me down a rabbit hole to become a life coach from CTI Coactive Coaching. And today I'm a mind and life power coach who helps people break free of their limiting cultural beliefs to find the life they love and the love of their life.
Hello everyone, I am Sana. I am from New Jersey, a Pakistani American. Professionally, I work in the clinical research field. And personally, I have always had this purpose of empowering women of South Asian culture to be able to live the life that they want to live and be true to themselves instead of what the culture expects them to be. And so here I am pursuing that purpose, and I am also studying to become a life coach. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rabia and Sana Show podcast.
Today on the show, we are really excited to have our first guest, Mahnoor Ahmed. Mahnoor Ahmed is a master's student in counseling psychology, working as a psychotherapist, and we are looking forward to hearing your expert perspective, Mahnoor, on today's episode.
Your perspective is going to be on emotional manipulation, which we're eager to hear about from you. And so, hello, Mahnoor. Welcome to the Rabia and Sana Show. It's such an honor and privilege to have you here today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I think that this is a great topic, especially, for what the podcast is about, right? About culture and how emotional manipulation kind of, is intertwined in our culture, in our lives, and how it affects us. So I think it's a great topic, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the podcast. Yes.
Amazing. And so, let's start with the basics because, we had to learn about this ourselves. And so we want to know, what is emotional manipulation?
So emotional manipulation, and I'll read the proper definition. It's an exercise. So it's an action that you do where you influence someone through mental distortion or emotional exploitation, and with the intention to either seize power or control, benefits or privileges at the victim or the other person's expense. So the important word here is it's with that intention.
And how does it show up in our lives? You've given us the definition, but on the practical side, how can we spot emotional manipulation?
Yeah, so there's healthy influence, maybe the ones that we do with our kids. We try to get them to eat their veggies or go do something that we know is good for them. There is a healthy influence, or maybe our spouse doesn't like to go to parties and we try to get them, to go somewhere fun. There is a healthy influence that we have. And then there's this psychological manipulation. And the key is it's at that person's expense. It's something that they really do not want to do. They don't feel comfortable doing. It's not good for them, mentally or physically. However, it brings that person some sort of privilege or benefit, and that could be just because they want power and control. That could be the benefit itself. And so they make that person do that, right? So in emotional manipulation, that one person is being used for the benefit of the other. The manipulator is deliberately causing this imbalance of power and exploiting the victim, right, to serve their own agenda. And so there are many ways to catch it. It's an interesting concept because it's not one of those things where it's tangible. And sometimes you may not have the perfect example and you don't know how to explain it to someone else because there was a lot at play, right? It was body language, it was their mood, it was where you were physically in that location. Like there's so many aspects to it that sometimes it's hard to explain to others, but you can feel it, it's happening. And then we can even go into some specific examples of how,
I mean, by the example definition that you're giving, Mahnoor, I know that I definitely was a victim of this in my marriage. But what do you think, as a South Asian, how do you think it shows up in our culture and in our relationships?
So it shows up in many different ways, right? It's interesting because preparation for this podcast, I came across this article and I'll share it with you guys. It was called Pakistan's Psychological Destruction of Women at the Hands of So-Called Societal Norms. And the reason why it specifically says Pakistan is because I am Pakistani. So I wanted, make sure that the listeners know that. And so it was interesting because it talks about how women have been marginalized and presented as secondary members of society, right? And this is not just like our belief. This is not just like our experience, in a series of briefings on violence prevention by the World Health Organization. It is culturally believed in these countries that males have the right to correct or discipline female behavior. A woman is responsible for making the marriage work. A man has the right to assert power. And so these are societal norms that promote men's behaviors, right, and superiority. And so and then they'll use religion and culture as their backing. That's one of the big problems. You don't even realize that it's not religion, right? It's a misinterpretation of religion, and it's you're literally a victim of cultural norm. When I was reading this article, it was very interesting, and they talk about how there's already a power imbalance. Emotional manipulation, however, can be done by women. But what was interesting to me was there's a study also in this article talked about how the emotional manipulation that these women faced were by their in-laws, so including their mother-in-laws or sister-in-laws. Those are also women. But the thing is, because they're, the son or the brother's wife, it's that same imbalance that they entered the marriage with, right? So it's the imbalance of being a woman in the first place and then being the wife, daughter, or sister of somebody, right?
Right. And can you give us examples or the different types of emotional manipulation so that we just have a name to those behaviors that we probably see all the time, but we're just not recognizing that it could be emotional manipulation?
Yes. So the way emotional manipulation was, there are many tactics at play. So one of them could be, for example, the home court advantage. So this is where the interaction of the manipulation is usually happening either at your in-laws, or maybe if it's been done by your parents, it's happening in their home. It's happening at a place where the manipulator has dominance and control. They're familiar with that area. They've already established a sense of control. Their car, their home, their work, wherever it is. So sometimes you'll have things like that. Then you'll have other things like their body language, their expressions. You can just sense it. You can feel the energy that they're bringing into the conversation. Before we even get to the exact example of the manipulation, you also have to think, how were they with you before? Were they constantly judging and criticizing you, making you feel inadequate, gaslighting you from before? Guilt baiting is another thing. How have they already been making you feel? Because what happens is these are years or months or, however much time that they've already taken away self-esteem. And now you're already doubting your abilities, your knowledge, your perception of reality and everything. Then you have the actual situation that happens, including everything that I just mentioned, right? So things that can happen in a situation are manipulation of fact. That can include things like excuse making, like, oh, come on, she's older, she's wiser, just let her go, it's okay. Or it could be a manipulation of facts, like, I don't think, I was there, that's now how I saw the situation. Are you sure that's how it happened? She or he has never been like that with me. Right? There can also be things like being two-faced. Oh, I love your cooking, and then go to someone else like, no, she doesn't even cook well. I don't like it at all.
Can I ask a question there? When people distort the facts or change it, is that gaslighting?
Yeah, I feel like there's many terms that explain a situation, but it's just, it all comes under the giant umbrella of manipulation, right? You're being overwhelmed, right, with their interpretation of the situation to make you start doubting your own. Another tactic that I thought was very interesting was that they will ask you to speak first. This is so that when you establish your baseline and they're able to look for the weakness. So what is your problem? Problem hai kya? Right? They're usually asking you like, what's going on? So then when you establish the problem, they're able to poke holes at it versus
and it makes you feel like I'm the problem. That's what it makes me feel like, right? Problem hai kya would make me think that I am the one creating the problem or I am the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And it usually happens that they just turn it around rather than being the target, they turn it around and make it about what the other person is.
And that they are the victim and that they are the victim and we are the creator. That's just so crazy. I mean, it's making me think that this is an art. It's work, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And I used to think before doing a little bit more research on this, the thing about intention. Sometimes you like to believe, no, they don't have the intention of doing that. They just want things to work out for them, right? You start, trying to make excuses for this person, right? The thing is, they are wise enough to know what they're doing because they have to convince you either your facts are not right or they have to convince you to look in the other direction. So they're smart enough to know that something is happening. This person is uncomfortable. Whether I agree with them being uncomfortable or not, I'm not allowing them to feel this way. I'm not allowing them to criticize. I'm not even giving them opportunity to make changes. I'm not making changes. So the best thing and the easiest thing for me to do is to ignore it, to gaslight them, or to use any of these type of different techniques. So there is intention. You have to have this type of thinking in order to get there.
Do you think it's conscious? Do you think that people are so well aware that they're doing this? Or do you think that because it comes naturally, that it's just a response to those situations?
I think this is like one of those like nature versus nurture arguments. I think that it could be unconscious in the sense that this is what they've grown up seeing. And so it's very easy. So if you've grown up with parents that love using guilt on you, then you're naturally going to be someone who uses guilt baiting with your partner or your children or whoever it is.
Right. And that was what I was hoping that you would say, because it's because they were normal for us growing up. It's okay to do it. There's almost that permission that we can use these manipulation tactics with other people because, hey, my parents did it to me, or my brother did it to me, or my sister did it to me, and now it's okay for me to do it to other people. So it's so important that we're talking about this because emotional blackmail has been used on me by multiple relatives. And so would you like to tell us a little bit about emotional manipulation? Because I think that guilt trip and emotional manipulation or emotional blackmail happens so frequently.
I feel like the way that emotional blackmail, I feel like that's such like an extreme form of manipulation because that is full on intention. They know that you know what they're doing. So, I feel like that's one of those very extreme high levels of manipulation where you are telling this person, if you do this, then I can also, hurt this other third party maybe you guys are talking about, right? By telling them that you said this or you did that. And I can also ruin your relationship with them if you ruin my relationship with them, right? That's the way I'm trying to understand it. I think it's such an extreme form of manipulation because they're in your face saying, I will do this, and this is exactly what I'm doing. There's no doubt in your mind, am I getting manipulated? They're telling you.
Mm-hmm. Emotional manipulation, I think you were saying, comes down to control.
Yes. So like there has to be some sort of benefit for that person, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe the benefit, let's say it's about a third party. Maybe it's your in-laws, for example. You're not able to deal with them. You're talking to your partner about them, but your partner says, deal with it. That's, uses any of these tactics. The benefit that they're getting from this is they get to keep so and so peace at home. That's the benefit they get. Or the benefit that they get is then they don't have to deal with their parents. They only get to deal with you, and they see you as the easier target to change or dismiss. Their parents will be the harder target. Or it could honestly be because they just truly don't side with you on this. They believe that what their parents are doing is correct. This is the way our culture is. Why should anyone try and change it? Because they've been getting benefits from this culture since they were born.
And so you were saying that women are the weaker gender in the South Asian culture, perhaps in many cultures. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us of how this would be used by women on men? Can you give that example?
So, I mean, a classic example would be mother-in-law using manipulation for her son, but it's about controlling the son and then also his partner. You're controlling both of them, right? And the reason why you think you have that control is because you have the son to begin with. Sometimes those same mother-in-laws will be very different when it comes to their daughters, right? And it'll be like, you gotta have to deal with it on your own. Sometimes they'll be like that with they'll be equal with both their kids and manipulate them equally. So, those are the equal ones. So that's a classic example. You can see different ones of manipulation of sister-in-laws, maybe in the houses. And again, it has to do with what is your intention? What is your purpose of control? So if you're the older sister-in-law, maybe you've been used to being the center of attention, deciding things in the house, and now you have these new sister-in-laws and you don't want them to have that control that you used to have.
That's crazy. The mother-in-law one that I can think of is the mother-in-law saying to her son that I raised you. The love that I have for you is way more than your wife just came in and she's new. She doesn't know you like I know you for so long. Like I have seen that so many times from my mom and from my mother-in-law from both sides. So it's just that makes the son feel so guilty. That, oh yeah, my mom raised me, like my love for her is way more than my wife's.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting how there's a competition.
Yeah.
The mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. And I think that competition is really unhealthy because I remember in my marriage, I've been married, as you all know, and I remember that my first mother-in-law was really good about this, that she said, I never want to compete for my son with you. She was very good about this. And she said clearly to me that he's my son and he's your husband.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Never a competition for the husband in my first marriage. Second marriage, not so much. There was a constant battle. So I had a remote control husband where the mother had the remote control and she would higher the volume and he would jump higher, or lower the volume and he would jump lower. We were in different states in the US and he would listen, even though there was a lot of manipulation going on in our house. And I didn't know that that's what it was. There was no value on what I was saying. Everything was about his mother. And this is not about making him right or wrong. I think this is just culturally how we're raised, that we have to listen to our parents, even when we're adults, that we have to obey and follow their commands. Whatever they say, whether right or wrong, they're right. I think that could be seen as emotional manipulation as well. So ingrained and built into our respect for our elders.
So what I'm thinking is that I had this also in my marriage, a lot of it from my mother-in-law and my ex-husband. What do you think makes the person who is going through it not knowing it is emotional blackmail and manipulation and all of that? What do you think it makes them feel like? And what kind of consequences do you think it has on their lives and their own self?
There are different stages, I guess, people are at. Some people they're able to see them in emotional manipulation. They're able to call it out. However, as years pass, when you're dealing with the whole getting belittled and dehumanized, or even things like negative humor that's designed to just poke at your weaknesses and disempower you, eventually those things will work and you will feel so captured by all this that you won't be able to see it as clearly as you used to one day. And so I remember I took a graduate certificate in victimology, so the studies of victims and trauma. And so we had a lot of courses on domestic violence. And one of the things for, domestic violence, and in fact, we even had a course on human trafficking. And because you'll talk to a lot of traffic victims and you can't just be like, hey man, come out, let me help you. Parents can't even be like, hey, come back home, I'll take care of you, I'll forgive you. They won't come back home. Why? Because they're so mentally captured by the manipulator. They're so and I remember, Rabia, you mentioned earlier about speaking about Stockholm syndrome, and so this kind of almost falls into that category where and you start making excuses for the person who's manipulating you, and then you start believing maybe it is my fault, maybe the problems do only occur when I speak out about them, and if everyone can live so happily and all these women are all living like this, and why can't I am the problem, I'm weak. So sometimes you can see that situation as well, which is obviously very disheartening. And that is not easily fixed, because you have now encompassed their mind and their image of themselves.
You're sympathizing with the abuser, and therefore I must be wrong. That it's because it's okay to do that. I've been led to believe that, oh, give him a break. He's supposed to be like that.
I was going to say that gender bias also comes into play a little bit here. We have that so much in our Desi culture anyways, where a lot of the times women are the more vulnerable population. And when this is in play, it can even more make us feel like as if we were the problem. It is maybe my fault, make you feel like guilty, because we already have that sort of bias structure where the women are supposed to listen and we are supposed to be, dominated and not have our own choices a lot of the times.
So I didn't have behaviors to identify things weren't working in my marriage. I didn't know that gaslighting or distorting my truth was happening. I didn't know that the silent treatment was a form of emotional manipulation, emotional abuse. But inside me, I felt like something's not right. But I saw it happening in other homes. So I'm thinking, this is how it's supposed to be. Oh, give the guy a break. He had a hard day at work. Or just making excuses for justifying that it's okay to be treated like that. But every year on my birthday, I would write a letter, and then I would read the letter to my ex-husband. And basically, I wasn't happy. And I didn't know that the reason I wasn't happy was because of these things that were happening, the grief I was carrying, and I was bitter and angry, and I was manipulative too. So I'm not saying that I was an angel at that time. I was used the same thing. I was normalizing, and it was permission for me to do the same as well. So anyways, every year I would write a letter. And when I read the letter to him, he said, oh, you can't leave me. And the reason you can't leave me is because there's something wrong with you. That you're saying all these things, there's something wrong with you. How can you go back to your parents' home now? You left the house as one. So there was this guilt. You're going to go back as three. How can you do that? And not acknowledging that you're in the home, like silent, like there was no communication for weeks. But I didn't know. And I think there are lots of people out there that just don't know that this is happening. So now that I know this, what could I do to prevent it?
What you said about not being able to see it, the thing with this type of manipulation is that because it's been happening for a course of time, there are changes. You're not able to see them because it's not like a day change. It's very subtle, small changes. Maybe you lose interest in the things that you used to care about. You stop seeing people that you once used to see. You stop communicating the way you communicate. You don't laugh as much as you used to. You don't find pleasure and enjoyment in the things that you once used to, right? I think the way that you wrote the letter, I feel like it would be more easy to see then, like, oh my God, a year from now, I used to love, love, love this. How come I'm not doing this anymore? Why do I not find care in this? So there is a way to see it. And that's, where I guess like different experts can help out with, or even family members that have seen changes in you. Maybe they can point it out. But you asked me like, okay, what could you have done at that time? I think if there is violence or you suspect violence, then there are very strict measures that you should take for that. Absolutely. There's different hotlines and places you should call. But with that said, let's say it's more minimal and more moderate levels of manipulation where you're not worried about life or safety, is to set boundaries and to communicate properly. A lot of times I'll speak to women and they will talk about different problems they're having. I'm like, okay, when you discuss this with your partner or whomever it was, what did they say? They never have. And I understand it's a very difficult position to be in to communicate that properly. If it is minimal, maybe you can. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I have, discussed this with my partner. I said to him, I'm like, hey, I don't like it when you say things like that. You're making me feel guilty. And I'll give you guys, an example is he likes to visit his parents as often as possible. And so one time I said, okay, you're just going for 2 days. I have work to do. You can go without me. And he felt a little bit weird going without me. I'm like, okay. And then we had like a little bit of a conversation. I'm like, okay, you're about to start guilting me into making me feel like I'm a bad partner if I don't go with you. Don't do that, because that's obviously not true, because then I'm going to start doubting everything else you compliment me for, right? If this one thing that I'm not agreeing with, you're going to start putting everything into question. So sometimes communication will help. And then I also found it interesting about the whole turn tables around on them. So like, instead of being in their home court, in their car, in their room, wherever it is, try and find, a very mutual area. Try and then asking them to speak first. What do you think it is that I've been complaining about for a year? I'm just curious what you think it is. Get them to speak first. Kind of like, use the opposite tactics. Of course, looking for patterns is one of them. Figuring out, hey, is this actually something I'm going through? Is this something that's affecting me? And of course, going to, coaches or counselors and therapists. And however, if you are going to go to couples, make sure your partner's open to it and it's mild to moderate levels of manipulation that you want to discuss, nothing severe, because then you can put yourself in harm's way if it's, really bad. And then you can also go to individual therapy, individual counseling, start talking to someone so that you're not just focused on this issue for the rest of your life. You can try and live out your other days, the other hours.
That's interesting that you say this, because two things are coming to mind. One is emotional manipulation. By definition, it's the behavior that you're saying, but is it also dependent on how frequently it happens versus if it happens once a year, it's not really emotional manipulation? Or does it need to reoccur frequently to have that negative impact or that harmful impact on our well-being and our mental health?
I guess it's one of those things where it depends on how it's affecting the victim in the situation. So even if you're asking your partner to go to this one place with these certain amount of people, even just once a year, but it affects them so severely and it can really mess with their months, it can mess with their minds. It took them a long time to find that peace, and they know that if they go see those people, it'll trigger everything, that they're not strong enough to do it. Then even that one time is so severe that it affects this person. If it's a one-time thing where you can handle it and you understand how it's benefiting the other person, but you guys have an open dialogue about it and communication, then it's not manipulation anymore. Then it's like, hey man, it's something I want you to do. I know it doesn't benefit you. In fact, it might even make things worse. I promise I'll be there with you. It just really helps me because of this. Then that's not manipulation, right? Like, then that's communication, and then that's up to you guys to decide.
So it's how you express what you want to happen, the end goal, and it's how you communicate it versus use manipulative ways to make the other person feel bad about it. So taking ownership of what you want, acknowledging that other person won't like it.
Yeah.
It won't be their favorite thing to do, but also express that it would make them happy. So rather than making someone feel guilty for not making them happy, they would say, this would make me happy if we could do this together. And I know you're not going to like. I think couples do this, like movies. I don't like sci-fi. And so my ex-husband loves sci-fi, and talk about passive aggressive behavior. I would roll my eyes every time he would talk about these movies, right? I'm like, I don't get it. What you like in these movies, Indiana Jones, or all of those movies. They were not my kind of thing. And anyways, but not that Indiana Jones is science fiction. But I didn't know how to say it nicely. We are not taught to communicate in a way like you're saying. If I could go back in time and say things better, what would you say would be a great way to communicate you don't like something? Even when your husband says he would like you to do, not just you, but in general, if someone's husband says that they would like you to do a certain thing their partner won't like, wouldn't that partner still feel guilty if they said no?
Yeah, they would. The example that was in my head was, so my husband's an introvert and he doesn't like going out as much as I do. And I love going out. And so I would try to convince him to go out, once in a while, depending on, what event it is. And so, one time he was just really like, I don't want to be there. And I knew his mood was going to be off. And I was like, then neither of us are happy. You don't want to be there, and then your mood is going to be a certain way where I'm not going to enjoy it to that level anyways, right? It's a lose-lose situation. And so I asked him, like, but what is it about this specific event, right? Like, what is it about this that we could improve your mood or make it something better for you, because it's very important for me that you go to this, right? And I explained why it's important. And then he said some really real things. He said, sometimes I feel like I'm left alone. I don't know people there, and then you don't talk to me, and then I'm just cornered there alone, and then people will ask me about work, and I don't like talking about work, or an actual real concern. And he's like, and then I feel exhausted because when we go for so many hours. You never want to leave. I'll try and signal you like, let's go, it's time to go, and you won't. And you know what I mean? You force me to take pictures, whatever, a whole bunch of real things. And I was like, okay, these are actual things that I can work on. And then I was like, okay, I promise, this is the amount of time. This is that signal. I will be next to you. I will check in on you. And then that is how I was able to make it a little bit more enjoyable for him while also still getting to do my thing.
That's really cool, Mahnoor. I think that that's amazing that you can do that with your husband. But what I am thinking, from my experience, is some of the suggestions that you gave to prevent, right, and to reinvent some of these cultural barriers. I think it's so hard in our culture to do that, like open communication of that with your spouse. That is, I would not have been able to do that at all, because if I did, I think I got even more emotional manipulation in return, in the sense of that, why are you saying this? Because you are too American, you're too modern. You have to realize that kids come first, and that, family comes first, things like that. Or counseling. Counseling is something which is not common at all in the Desi culture, right? So I think these things are even harder for us as Desis. It's like twice overload because of other challenges that we face. So what can you suggest? Because I know so many, not just women, but men, who are in these type of unhealthy relationships, and we just live that way. It's just the normal to have an unhealthy relationship because it's not abusive. It's not physically abusive. It's not that bad. Suck it up,
So I'm thinking of different relationships in my life. Some of them I got lucky with because I was able to have this type of thinking from the groundwork up. So, for example, I had a very interesting conversation with my mother-in-law one time when she was feeling a little weird about her son staying over at my parents' house, right? But I used to see it as, if I could stay at your parents' house, you can also stay at my parents' house. We're here to visit them. There's nothing wrong with it. And I remember one time sitting there and we were watching a show together. And I was like, do you like that we're watching this show together? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, because we're learning about each other. I learn what makes you laugh. You learn what makes me laugh. We're learning about each other. She's like, yeah. I'm like, I want that with my husband and my mom too, though. I don't see there's anything wrong with it. And it wasn't, and I started the conversation when it wasn't like in an argument or anything. Obviously she was taken aback by it, but she, started explaining different cultural things about it, different cultural excuses. And for each excuse, I'm like, that still doesn't make sense, because they never make sense. They never do. I'm like, but that still doesn't make sense. I don't see anything wrong. The whole, oh, what will people say? I'm like, well, we don't need people like that around us. And I get it. I come from a different background thinking. But anyways, I don't know if that conversation ever really did help, because in the end, it was my husband that just needed to put his foot down and be like, please, I will come running to you whenever you guys want me to. You want me here? You want her here? We're here. I'll do anything for you. But when I'm there, that's not of your concern. And he had to eventually have that conversation. And a lot of men don't. And so it was very hard for him to do that. But then I'll think about relationships, like, for example, my fault, where it didn't start like that, right? I'm not able to have that conversation. With him, we got a little bit lucky in the sense that all of us siblings will kind of go together and be like, what about it when mom does this that you not like? And it's usually to defend our mom. Like, what about it? Which is unfair, but like, this is the way that we have to manage it, right? Like, why do you not like it if, for example, if she didn't work? Or what's wrong if she takes this course? And can you explain what is it that you're afraid of, that she won't do housework? Like, we'll make sure it's done. Like, what is it that you won't get fed on time? We'll make sure you're fed. So it was really awkward, but like, I feel like we were able to a little bit get in there, maybe because he was older and not holding to control and power as much. That's when we got in. But the only other thing we'll do is, if I know I can't help the situation and I know she can't speak up, is just be there for her and try to get her to focus on other aspects of her life that can bring her, happiness and joy.
It's good to hear the examples, how you just shared with us, right? The siblings went together to speak to the father about how do we make this better? How do we resolve this? Or what's bothering you? And how can we make it work for everyone versus one person sharing it with others? Because what will someone think? How will I say it? Because often we don't know how to express ourselves because that's another cultural norm. We haven't been taught how to express ourselves. So many things you're bringing up that are getting me to think and remember my own life as well. And, we could have this conversation forever, but it's been great having you and, talking about emotional manipulation.
Yeah, I think it was really, really great, Mahnoor, to get like that definition of what it is, because it makes me reflect back on my experience and to realize that it is actually a thing, like there's a psychological issue that we don't realize what it is. So it was really awesome to hear you break it down and then talk about how under the big umbrella of emotional manipulation are all these little things that come under it: gaslighting and blackmail and making you feel guilty and all of that stuff. It really just falls under all of it together. And then knowing that it's intention comes a part of it as well, and consciously comes part of it as well. And I think it was the suggestions that you gave to prevent are also really, really awesome. And the little example that you gave of your family, I think that's great too. And I think that in my life as well, that's what I'm trying to do now with my family. It's really basic, small steps that you can do. And like I started to have this open dialogue with my mom a little more, which is something we never had. We don't talk about these type of things. And so I'm slowly getting her to get there to talk about it openly. And I think if other daisies can listen to this and relate to this, and some of these examples that you gave as suggestions will go a long way and be really, really helpful. So thanks a lot. I think it was really, really informative and really great to hear you say all those things.
One of my favorite quotes is by Einstein, and it's: insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. You have to try and make change in order for change to occur. And so there are so many different techniques and different ways to explore it. Even if you've communicated the same thing and it's not being heard, try communicating in a different space. Maybe you only communicate it when you're angry or frustrated. No one likes feeling attacked, right? Especially someone who knows deep down that they may be wrong. No one likes feeling that they're the bad guy. And so you have to see their human side and kind of communicate that way. So, for example, I would say one of the tougher people I've ever worked with is my dad. And so I know that if I come in a very attacking manner, like, why are you like this? And don't you feel bad? And, things like that, it's not going to work out. I have to somehow understand his justifications for things, see to that side of him, and then also be like, okay, but at the same time, like, we're all trying to have a happy day. Like, can we talk about this later? Whatever, the situation requires me to say. So, I just think that it's important that if we do not have the skills to communicate, we learn how to do that. And if it is easy for the person that is manipulating us, try and get them to see their behavior, not by yelling or attacking, but try to get them to see it in like, hey, what do you think is manipulation? Do you think I do it, by the way? Is there something about me that you don't like? Do you feel like I use guilt on you a lot? And I know that sounds weird, and I've done it actually, where like sometimes I wanted to speak to my partner about something, and I knew that if I spoke to him about it first, he's gonna be like, oh, here she goes again. So what I said was, hey, tell me about your day. Is there something I did that may have annoyed you, by the way? Like, I'm sorry for it. I didn't mean it. I yelled at you earlier. Even if I know I was completely right, it took a lot in me to say that. And then, he'll start saying things like, yeah, I didn't like it when you did this, this, and this. I'll be like, okay, well, now I'll address it. And then I'll be like, okay, now it's my turn. And then he has to ask me the same question.
That quote that you said, it just makes so much sense, because you have to do things differently. And at the same time, in order to do things differently and new things, it takes courage. You have to get past that fear and just take that leap. And it's hard, really hard.
That's the number one thing. Don't isolate yourself, because if someone gets in your head and then you get in your own head, it's almost like game over, right? No, do not isolate yourself. Have people around you that can uplift you, that can empower you, that do the opposite of everything that is being done for you, so that you never feel powerless and you never feel alone, because that is the biggest key to this. If you feel alone, that's it. They've won.
Such great advice to the listeners for taking action and for knowing what to do and when to do it. And this does bring us to the end of our episode. And thank you so much, Mahnoor, for being with us today to talk about emotional manipulation. We've learned a lot today. We hope to have you back because you mentioned Stockholm Syndrome, and we would love to have you back and go really in depth about how that works. And we hope to the audience that you found this episode beneficial, that you enjoyed listening to us today. And as always, we look forward to being back next time to discuss some more of these topics that impact our everyday life so we can reinvent cultural norms. And so we're two Desi girls
reinventing cultural norms
with love.
With love. Bye-bye. Thank you, Mahnoor.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Please rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow the Rabia and Sana Show on social medias.
Remember, you can watch the video version on YouTube, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
If you want life coaching services, or you are reinventing cultural norms for yourself and think you would be a great guest and want to be on our show, please email contact@therabiaandsanashow.com.
And be sure to check out our next episode. See you next time.
See you next time.